Welcome back to another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the nonprofit accounting podcast, not just from one accountant's perspective. I'm one of your hosts, AJ Wheeler, but with me this week again is Tony Cajigas.
Hello, everybody.
And Mark Palardy.
Hey there.
Got a great episode for you this week. We got a couple articles and a roundtable discussion again. So got an article this week on the Great Resignation, why nonprofit employees are quitting and how to stop it, hopefully. 5 limiting beliefs of nonprofit leaders. What are those like kind of lingering, things that we tell ourselves or we think that limits us in our forwarding our mission, vision, and our nonprofit? We'll talk about it. And then addressing donor fatigue. Are you hitting up your donors too much? Are they getting fatigued of ask for money? We'll talk about why that happens and the strategy behind, engaging them and making sure they don't get fatigued when you're asking them for money. Because, we all know that that's happening in that time of year. So we'll talk about it. And then we got another do's and don'ts segment this week. And this week it's of technology. More importantly, technology implementation. What your nonprofit needs to think about when implementing new technology stacks and the do's and don'ts around that. We'll talk about all that. But first, Mark, you got our first article for us?
Yeah, thanks, AJ. My article is from a publication called Nonprofit Marketing, The Great Resignation, Why Your Nonprofit Employees Are Quitting and How to Stop It. So, as the post-pandemic world starts to kind of unfold, people have been making decisions as to whether their careers are satisfactory and whether they want to go back to jobs that they formerly held when it means going back into the office. And, for those of you listening later, they've kind of dubbed this in the news as the Great Resignation because all of these people are kind of having these internal reflections and deciding if this is what they really want to do. So this article kind of touches on why nonprofit employees are quitting. And, a lot of people posit the Great Resignation has more to do with income than anything else. And I think that's probably the case in a lot of for-profit industries where minimum wage isn't keeping pace with inflation or what it costs to just make a living at this point. So a lot of for-profits are just seeing an inability to fill positions and are seeing longtime employees saying, I don't want to work this hard for this little money anymore. But with nonprofits, there was a Gallup research poll that was done, and they found that in nonprofits specifically, the highest quit rate is among those that are not engaged or quote unquote actively disengaged workers, which makes sense from what we've talked about in this podcast since the beginning, right? Because nonprofits on par tend to maybe earn a little bit less, but the employees are more engaged because they believe in the mission, they believe in what they're doing, they can sleep at night because they're not just making money for the man, right? So if it's an organization they believe in, but they need to be kept engaged. And this article also talks about how it takes more than 20% of a pay raise to lure most employees away from a job that engages them. And it takes almost no pay raise whatsoever to lure away a disengaged worker. So I thought that was a really interesting statistic. And I'm just curious what both of you think about it.
Yeah, I think they listed some kind of like reasons why people were leaving and stuff. And I found the answers kind of revealing. And a lot of it boils down to essentially not having resources or the ability that anybody is carrying what they're doing, and I thought that was kind of really like disheartening in a segment of, or a niche that of the nonprofit world where I thought that would be the core main driving thing that people would be wanting and providing in a nonprofit space was connection to work, and I think even as an accountant, when I'm working with an organization through TCA or in the past, and even an auditor, I felt really good. Like I was a piece of that puzzle that was helping that mission and vision and that nonprofit and the people that they serve. I might not be directly acting in concert with, the actual people served, but I was able to like provide a service and provide insight into the financial areas that was facilitating that help and was providing, the resources needed for that. So that was one thing that I saw on there that really like struck a nerve with me, because I thought that would be much higher, or I just can't believe that that's not addressed, I think, in the employment situation. The other thing that got me was kind of at the bottom, there was some comments that were left on this article. And one of the comments is that their organization was viewing this as essentially, this is happening everywhere. This isn't our fault. People are leaving everywhere, so it's not our fault. And I think that that's the wrong kind of attitude to take. I think if you care about the mission and the vision and the people that are working with you to facilitate the services that you're offering, anybody leaving, you want to know why. You want to know why they left, what the reason was, and you want to provide them support in what they're doing going forward. I think this goes beyond nonprofits. I think having being working for your employees is kind of the mindset. This is directly out of the Gary Vee handbook of entrepreneurship. But if you're an executive director, really you should be working for your employees, not the other way around. And realistically, you're working for the organization and your employees and the mission and vision. And you need to provide them with the type of environment that makes them feel needed, wanted, appreciated, and be able to, come forward with any concerns that they have. And I think a lot of the reasons listed on this, and we'll link the article if anybody wants to see it. Like they're just things that I think should be done on a daily, or on a regular basis. One of them was, I know what was expected of me at work. If somebody doesn't have a clear outline of what's expected of them, and then a follow up of whether or not they're on what they're doing well and what they can improve on. I mean, you're just letting somebody languish out there, and they have no idea of a path forward, of upward mobility. If they're doing a good job, if there are things that they can improve on, they're just kind of left in limbo. And I think just relying on, you're working in an organization that does good things to limp it along, it's not enough. And especially not these days, and there's opportunities abound. Everybody's hiring right now, and there's a lag in people that are, there's a big divide in talent out there. So if you have good people, you need to try and hold on to them. And one of the ways of doing that is making sure they're engaged at work.
Yes, I agree with what AJ said. This goes beyond nonprofits. I'm a very firm believer in that good employees are one of the most important assets to your organization. And it's very important to keep hold of good employees. People, as far as nonprofits go, people want to feel like they're needed and that they're doing a good job. A thank you goes a long way. I firmly believe, so I was told this long time ago, if you're not happy with your job, it may be time to start looking for another one. And as far as managers and or supervisors are concerned, if your employees are engaged, they know what they need to do, and you train them, it just makes your job easier and runs more smoothly. So it's just people really want to do the right thing, and they want to feel like they're doing a good job. Maybe, and a pat on the back goes a long way.
Yeah, I think excellent points by both of you. And I think, at the end of the day, right, if you're working at a nonprofit and you go home and you're like, I love my job, and I really enjoy going to work, or I really enjoy how I'm contributing to the mission, then that's going to go a long way in keeping you there. And if especially in an environment like this where people are hungry to find employees, if other people approach you and say, hey, would you like to work with us? It's a lot harder to turn them down if you don't feel cared about and you don't feel loved at work, right? Or if you don't love the job you're going to. If it's just a slog and you don't feel appreciated, well, yeah, it makes it much easier, and those percentages bear that out. So something to keep in mind. AJ, I think you got our second article.
Yeah. And before I jump into my next article, I would say if you're in the situation of running a nonprofit and you're having these kind of employment woes, or you're noticing people are leaving, I'd immediately start asking for feedback. This is a part where you can right the ship, and I think getting feedback from your employees is super important. So, but enough said on that. I think we could talk about that all day. But our next article actually is titled "5 Limiting Beliefs of Nonprofit Leaders." So this talks a little bit about, and I've seen this in my stint in the nonprofit area, is that often people are leaders, and maybe we're talking about executive directors or program managers or directors of certain programs at a nonprofit. But there's 5 limiting beliefs that they list in this article. And so I'll lay the 5 beliefs out, and then I think maybe we can dive in a little bit more into each one of them and figure out if that is something that maybe we, like they've missed something, or maybe they didn't kind of, dig deep enough into it. So limiting belief number 1, my for and no more. Essentially, I didn't know what they meant by this. I've never heard this term before, but essentially what it means is that essentially and they talk about it in a church kind of way. So in the olden days, when churches, they were talking about, helping the congregation first. And that was really their focus of just their flock or their congregation. And so it may be, good to foster like a small, community like that, but realistically, like you want to not just insulate yourself in a circle where, you're just kind of honed in on this one area of only the people that you're serving, or the only people that are in your area. Especially like if you're a program director in an organization, you can't just always think about just your program. You need to be considering the rest of the organization's health and how you can help to further everybody else in that way. Of course, you need focus on what you're doing, but I think in the back of your mind, knowing that expansion is always good and helping more people is always good. Limiting belief number 2. Now, this may come as a surprise. Frugality is a virtue. Being too frugal is not good. I've seen, and they talk about it here. They talk about, like often nonprofits are make a penny last to 2 cents, or, like use $1 like it's $2 and try to get the cheapest options possible, cut prices and cut corners as much as possible. But what I've found is that if you're investing in good, in good resources for your organization, and this harkens back to the employment discussion, but if you're doubling down on the type of resources that you're providing and you're able to earmark money that is being used well, it costs money to make money, is the old saying. But especially in an organization, being too frugal, like not paying people enough, will cause them to leave in droves. So frugality is good, always pinching a penny here and there and getting rid of things you don't need. But extreme frugality is often frowned upon and can lead you into trouble. Limiting belief number 3, I know everything I need to know, AKA know-it-all syndrome. I think this goes without saying in our professional lives and even in our personal lives. The day you stop learning, or the day you stop looking for, like educating yourself further, is the day you should step away from it all, and I think this goes to show, there's always something to learn, and there's always somebody new to learn it from. So I think that pretty much goes without saying. And I never thought of it in the way that they're stating it here, but I have a parallel thinking on that. And then limiting belief number 4, we're too small, I'm too new. And this really is like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the way that they say it. Want to go for a big grant? Present yourself as the humble but worthy underdog. They're talking about essentially, if you think you're too small or you're too new to be able to get something, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Always reach for bigger and try to reach a larger audience, and reach for, if you reach for the stars, you might make it. But if not, or what do they say? I don't remember how the saying goes, but if you reach high, you'll at least get 1 or 2. And it's not lost here. You'll get comfortable with the process. So it always says to keep looking forward and enjoy the process. Enjoy the process that goes along with this. And then limiting belief number 5, I think this is probably, I'm not good enough. And it kind of harkens into the imposter syndrome. And I was kind of funny to read this, but often, we're our own worst critics, right? We beat ourselves up quite a bit. And it talks about giving yourself the chance to grow and learning from your mistakes. and being able to, like really be self-reflective, but not, so self-reflective that you're beating yourself up. So I'd like to get the panel's take, you guys' take on maybe, if any of these hit home, or if maybe they missed one, that wasn't in there, and what your guys' thoughts on the article was.
I'll go ahead and jump in here. So as far as regarding the first belief, your four walls, I mean, with today's technology, you really do have the world at your disposal as far as resources, et cetera, et cetera. The second belief, being a little frugal, I laughed a little bit at this. I'm a firm believer in paying your employees, what they're worth, but I'm also, maybe I'm a little old school and I'm a little handy. So I believe if something needs to be done, and you can do it to save a little money, go ahead and do it. As far as the third belief, nobody knows it all. I mean, we all know that. And like the article said, everybody needs intellectual stimulation, and that is 100% true. The too small part, we have to start somewhere. You can't, if you're afraid to start out, you'll never get anywhere. And the article talks about reaching out to other similar organizations and utilizing your resources, which is a great idea. And the last one, not being good enough. I think, well, first of all, you should believe in yourself and the organization's mission. But I feel like the more experience you have in life, I believe the more confidence, you do have. And I think that may come with age. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah. Well, first off, when I read number 5, I just couldn't help but think back to old SNL with Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. So, I mean, but it's true, right? There is something about going in with an attitude of, you know what, I am good enough to do this. And sometimes there's a little fake it till you make it, but eventually you get the knowledge and you start a podcast. Anyway. But that doesn't mean you know it all. I definitely that know it all, or I know everything I need to know, is one that hits home particularly hard for me, because I have worked with directors and people in positions of power before who don't want to make any changes to the organization because it's been running fine the way it's always been. They already know everything, and they're not thinking forward and thinking to adjust for the future and for what the current state of affairs are. And I think the example here of having mentorship, having training programs, investing in keeping current with the way nonprofits are functioning, listening to podcasts that are so well informed on the topic, just all sorts of ways that you can say, hey, I know enough to know that I need to know more, right? I kind of always go back to the Excel example. When I have been in an interview position where I've looked to hire people, you always kind of test them by saying, well, how skilled are you in Excel? And anybody who tells me they're an expert in Excel, I always think, they are not, because unless you're writing books on it or teaching high-level webinars, there's so much in Excel that you don't know. An intermediate to advanced level person would say, oh, well, I'm probably using about 20% of what Excel does, right? So knowing that you're not necessarily an expert and that you're always kind of working towards that, really, like AJ said, really can help an organization, because it shows growth. You stick with people over time, they're growing into their position, they're learning more, they have the history of it. It's very important to not be limited by bringing in somebody who thinks they know it all, is going to change everything to the way they've always run things, and then they just don't know what's going on in the organization. So I'll leave it there. And I guess, Tony, you've got our next article.
Yeah, yes, I do. The name of the article is Addressing Donor Fatigue. So what they talk about is in some areas of the country, there are very many nonprofits that almost or do have the same mission. And what it is that a lot of potential donors are beginning to get tired of being, hit up for money from the same type of organizations. And some have concluded that this is related to donor fatigue, and they wanted to know how to address it. And what the author talks about is getting to know your donor, which is very important. A lot of people just feel like they're asked for money, and then that's it, and then they're done. So a lot of people, the author was actually speaking to a very large donor one time, and he asked the question, why do you think, there's donor fatigue? And the person said that, have you ever considered asking why you give to the organization? What other organizations do you support? What was your largest gift and why? And that kind of almost like the light bulb went off in his head. And he thought that, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And donors would feel like their donation was actually maybe a little bit more important in their mind. And, when it comes down to it, we're all just people, and they just want to feel like they're doing a good thing by donating. So what does the panel think?
I think this goes back to what we've always talked about on this podcast, is that, realistically, donations and your donor list and who you're getting money from, whether that be grants, contracts, individual donations, it all starts with a relationship with that person. And I think as soon as people start looking at, either a grant or a contract, or even and most importantly, individual donations as just a daddy Warbucks or, a blank check or a source of funding, that's where you really, lose out on the competitive edge that you have if you don't build, if you have a competitive edge, I guess to say, if you build a relationship with those people. I've seen lots of organizations that maybe they don't have the best accounting, they don't have the best, donor, engagement, or, they don't have a great grant writing staff, but they're very successful. And the reason why they're very successful is because they have a strong relationship with their funders, whether that be grantors. I work with an organization, we're still cleaning up books from 2020, but they're still continuing to get grants and contracts because they have a good working relationship and are able to be honest with their grantors. And these are large grantors. They're government agencies that, things just haven't gone well. They're getting things in place, but they're continuing to receive money. And I think the same thing goes, with this donor fatigue thing. I think if you have people that you're just constantly hitting up, hey, it's that time of year, can we rely on you for another $5,000 donation this year? Well, I don't just think it's in part just, a few areas in the country. I think this is nation and probably worldwide, where there's many different nonprofit organizations, and they're growing by the minute, that offer the same kind of services that you would, or are ancillary, or, parallel to what you're doing, that somebody can give their money to. And so I think, just like we talked about with the employees, donors want to be recognized and given a pat on the back for what they're doing. And that it needs a relationship with who you're donating. They can't be just looked at like a blank check that you're going to, hit up to write. I think they need to be connected with what their money, where their money is going to, what it's accomplishing, and then the relationship that they have. Some of the most successful fundraising organizations that I've worked with always have like some kind of donor appreciation, or some kind of donor like party or acknowledgement, something that sets apart and makes it feel a connection with the organization and a connection with the money that they gave to the outcome that's happening. And I think really that's what the article's driving at in so many words, is that, especially if you're a fundraising professional, you have to make this connection. It can't just be, a salesman position. It would do salesmen good to follow the same kind of trajectory, but this isn't a sales job. You're not pitching a brand new Cadillac to somebody. You're really driving home a mission and a vision and trying to get the money to support that, to support the services that you're offering out there. So I think really connecting with your donor base and making sure that there's a relationship there should be priority number one for these fundraising organizations and for any organization that takes in donations.
Yeah, this reminds me of an anecdote. Well, an anecdote for me when I lived in Hawaii for about a decade. I think 1 in every 6 people was a real estate agent, and you'd always know who your real estate agent friends were because you'd meet them, you'd have your surface conversation, and then within 30 seconds it'd come around to, are you looking to buy or are you looking to sell real estate? And you started to feel like, okay, I'm crossing the street because here they come with the pitch again, right? And so donor engagement and donor fatigue, it's real, man. The struggle is real. And if you're a fundraiser, if you just come across as somebody who's, here comes so-and-so again with the cup out, with the plate, right? They need the money again, right? If you don't have donor engagement, which both Tony and AJ spoke very eloquently about, you're just coming across as like, oh, here comes this guy again. All right, it's Christmas time. I'll send in my X number of dollars because I do that every year. But they're not excited about it. It feels like an obligation. They're not engaged with what the organization is doing. And I think another important aspect of this, which is really important to me, right? Because time is precious to me. Find out how your donors want to be engaged. Do they want a phone call? Is an email good? Do they want to meet and greet? Do they want a face-to-face? Right? Because your donors are all going to be a little bit different. I'd much prefer an email to having to take a phone call from somebody pretty much on any topic. But, figure out not only why your donors want to be involved in your organization, but ask them, well, what's the best way for me to reach out to you? Just come at it from pretend you're a donor and think about what your needs would be, what your wants would be. Like, this relationship would be much better if they engaged me in this particular way. And then your donor fatigue starts reducing because the donors really feel like you care about what's going on with their needs while you're asking them to help you with your needs. So I guess that's what I would say on that.
No, I think it's great points from everybody. And I think, if there's one takeaway from this article, I think it's like, I can't say it enough, being connected with who you're getting money from, whether it be a grantor, an individual donation, or, like a fee for service arrangement. All this stuff is built on relationships. And I can't stress enough about how fostering those relationships really drives that donation. Anyway, talking about driving, let's drive into our topic for the week. Mark, you got our do's and don'ts of this week?
Yeah, we'll pull right up to the bumper, baby, and talk about technology do's and don'ts. So, technology can be a competitive advantage for nonprofits, right? Oftentimes, if you've got the tools and the technology tools to perform, you can do things that other smaller, less nimble, less technology-oriented nonprofits can do. But it has its drawbacks as well. So this week's do's and don'ts topic are do's and don'ts for nonprofit technology. I'll start off. And I will say one of the big do's would be let your mission and your strategy be your guides when you're making technology decisions, right? Know what your mission of your organization is. Don't overspend on technology or try to branch out in areas that aren't going to fit what your mission, vision, and values are, and have a strategic plan and make sure that technology fits in with that strategic plan.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'll throw one in there. Establish a strong system. So make sure that your tech matters to what your staff needs do. Make sure your staff knows how to use it. That includes like training them on what they're doing. And then make sure they know who to contact when issues arise. Nothing worse than implementing a new system and then you're the person kind of leading the training. It's not like you're the expert in that. And, you have a free, 6 month of follow-up on it and they're contacting you. So I would be like, have a clear plan of how you're going to implement it, how the training's going to go, and then what happens in follow up. Because, once training's great when you're doing it based off of the examples that they're given. But I can tell you from experience, the minute you get that thing installed and people start using it, they're going to break it in all kinds of ways you never even thought of in training. So make sure you have a follow up on how those technical issues are going to be. And then the other one is make sure that you include forget to include your staff into the tech decisions. Like they're the ones that are going to be using it and you need them to buy in. The worst kind of tech implementations I've seen is where, like you implement this brand new expensive system that's supposed to have all these bells and whistles, and everybody's just complaining that the other system was so much better and they were never consulted about this change. So I actually have an antidote for this. I used to work as an auditor for lack of a better word, it was a retirement community. And they were switching from like an old kind of legacy accounting system, and they wanted something brand new. And so they hired this really well-to-do, expensive accounting firm in town to lead them through the process of finding a new accounting system. And they surfacely included very minutely included the accounting staff in that decision. Well, $50,000 later of this implementation, or it could have been even more, I forget the exact number, but it was a lot of money to implement this new accounting system. They get it up and running. They can't even report a bank reconciliation that prints out correctly. And they were still doing billings, the AR billings to Medicare by hand. And everybody was ready to jump ship in the accounting department. There was no kind of support given to these poor people that were in a basement and, like in the basement of the building doing the accounting and essentially running the organization financially. They were never consulted on this, and they were beyond livid that this had happened. And the reason it got so bad was because the decision laid literally upstairs with everybody that was not involved in the accounting department. And we left as auditors not soon after that, but it didn't go well. And I have a feeling that there was a mass exodus there and people were not happy. And so, if you're thinking about making a technology switch, please, please, please take these considerations into account, because nothing will sink it faster than the users not wanting to use it or feeling like they weren't listened to when you're implementing it.
Well, one of the do's is plan effectively your technological needs. A lot of technology becomes obsolete after short periods of time. So it's very important you do your research, get the right technology that works for your organization. And this would lead to one of the don'ts that we have listed is to not make your technology decisions based on cost alone, because there are other factors involved, making sure you have the right technology for your organization, et cetera, et cetera. It's user friendly enough for you and or whoever is using it in your organization.
I just might want to add, I got a little anecdote to that. I was working with an organization lately that had an old accounting system from 2013 that was like desktop based. And it was a pricey piece of software at the time, but they had never upgraded it. So it was from, this is like 8 years old. And it was barely limping along, and I'll be surprised if it makes it to next year, but they're really hesitant on getting a new one. And to be honest, they could probably just go with like QuickBooks Online or an out of the box kind of solution, but they haven't done the due diligence to be able to find it. And so it's coming to a point where that thing is going to be more than obsolete. They haven't even been able to upgrade their operating systems out of Windows 2007. So if there's anything to learn from their mistake, it's like, make sure you're on top of this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's, that brings up that topic brings up security issues, right? Because technology goes hand in hand with security issues. And you need to make sure that you have policies in place. Don't forget that technology, you're going to have all sorts of different levels of people who are approaching your technology. You need to have use policies and backup procedures and policies, use policies for employees, right? Are they allowed to use the computers that they're on for non-work activities? Maybe they are during lunch, who knows, but have those policies in place. Are they using nonprofit equipment for for-profit entities? Because that can open up a hornet's nest. What if they're intercepting data or circumventing user authentication or security procedures? You leave yourself open to phishing attacks, et cetera. I know one of the places I recently worked, you were not allowed to install any exe executable programs onto the software because it was just too dangerous that you were going to infect the computers with some sort of virus, some sort of ransomware, and really, without having strong security protocols in place, you could have data theft or data loss, theft, ransomware attacks, et cetera. So security and being mindful of your technology policies are both really going to be important as both a do and a don't in this sphere.
I would say, as a follow-up to the, no exe programs are able to be installed, would be that although you may implement something like that, make sure you have a backup plan on how to install new programs onto those computers that need it, because nothing was more frustrating than when I worked in public accounting and you had a lockdown computer like that and you weren't able to, it needs an upgrade for your accounting software and you were unable to do it because it had a new exe file, and you spent the next 3 hours on the line with somebody to try and hunt down who could unlock your computer and log in as an admin to be able to do it. So make sure you have a plan if you're going to lock down things, how to not circumvent, but the procedures, if you need an update or you need to install a new program, how you get that approved and how you put that on there. So, but that leads into the other do that I have here is invest in data analytics. I can't speak today. To take advantage of the data that's present, if we're talking about like donor software, are you able to like slice and dice those donors to understand the demographic that they're coming out of? If we're talking about the accounting system, do you have a way to like slice and dice the accounting information in the correct way to be able to spit out the information that you need to present, and especially when you're considering a new accounting system, we're talking about nonprofits, and we had an episode recently about tracking restricted funds. Is the new accounting system going to give you more leverage than the old one? Is there new bells and whistles that you're able to leverage the data that's inside of your inside and tagged inside your information? What's happening? And then also too, like when we're talking back to donor software, like if you're tracking by event or campaign or by project, you're able to capture that information to find out what was successful, what worked, what didn't work. So I think it's like we live in a world where everything's tracked and you've got, numbers and statistics for everything, which we love to a certain degree. And you need to leverage that information that's available and at your fingertips as quickly as possible. So don't leave that off the table, because I think often that's an afterthought. When I talked earlier about the software that couldn't even do a bank reconciliation, you got to get down to the, you need to put it through its paces, and you be able to look at it from beginning, nuts to soup, right? Like you need to be able to look at it from beginning to end, and then you're able to ask better questions about what's available once the data is in there. So I think that's a big one. And then the other one is, I think, as a don't, I would just say don't overlook that portion, and don't forget to get buy-offs from other parts of the organization that might need information related to it. Often we think of like a new accounting system very, like shoehorned into just the accounting department, but don't forget, you need to then match your donations, for instance, with the development department. How are you going to facilitate new accounting reports that match up with the donation reports that the other organization? So you want to be able to like, we don't need to have a long discussion with the executive board and the development department and about a new accounting system, but you want to loop them in at some point to see if there's something that was lacking from the prior technology stack that you had that the new one would offer them, or better questions to ask the provider or for your choices of what may make it easier to bridge the gap between those other departments. Because we said it a million times on this podcast, the accounting department or any other department or anything like that in a business is not a silo. It's not an island. You're going to have to be transparent and share this stuff with other departments. So, if you can make it easier to transmit that data to another one, don't overlook asking other departments how this piece of technology is going to affect them or how it can help them.
I'll do the next don't. Ignore grants that can fund technology needs, which I was actually unaware of. Some grants could exist solely for this purpose, which is a great need to an organization, and an important one. Also look to add interesting technologically components that are already successful programs, so you can enhance them basically, and you can keep track of your records, so on and so forth. So it's very important that you can utilize the resources out there to get these grants.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Tony. That's one of my favorites, because that's something kind of unique to the nonprofit sphere, right? Like, there exist technology grants out there that if you are savvy about applying for them, you can definitely leverage what you've got and get specific equipment, right? You might have some really specific piece of equipment that you need to purchase to help grow your nonprofit. And there are organizations out there looking specifically to give money to somebody like you. So figure out where those are. Use your development department to see if there are some technology grants. And I think Tony's point also that using what is already working in your organization as a basis, right? Like, I've got this program and it's super successful, and we're able to help X number of people, but we would be able to help even more, or 20% more, or 50% more if we had this technology in place. Grant funders eat that stuff up. So make sure you leverage that. And I think unless anybody has any objections, I think we're good here. I think we've covered this topic absolutely exhaustively. Of course we haven't. So if you have some other things you'd like to add to this, feel free to comment on the YouTube channel, or hit us up at Profitless Pod on Twitter. So with that being said, we come to the conclusion of yet another episode of Profitless on Purpose. Boy, I'm having trouble with my P's this afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your engagement. I've already mentioned the Twitter handle. You know where to find us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. And remember, in closing, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.